Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. My name is TJ Van Tol, and I work. Oh, man, is my video frozen there, Dan?
It's a bit frozen.
Well, as I fix it, I look me like awkwardly staring at the ground there, which is a nice look. My name is TJ Van Tol. I work as a developer advocate for Progress. I am apparently a talking chicken now while I work on getting that set up. Let's see if that works better.
We all must aspire to something, TJ.
Yeah, well, while I'm introducing myself, with me, as always, is Dan. Dan, you want to introduce yourself while I see if my camera is going to cooperate this time?
Hey, I'm Dan Wilson, and I work with Digital Primates, and we do Enterprise React consulting. We also curate the Enterprise React newsletter, and so if that's your kind of thing, Google it. We won't sell your email address or spam you.
Awesome. Well, I don't know what that was about, but it looks like I'm back. And I did want to give a quick shout out, if I can put my screen up here, that if you're new here, this is React Wednesdays. It's a show that we do every week here on Twitch. We basically just bring on awesome guests from around the React and the JavaScript world and have them more or less teach us something new. So we're about to talk with the guys from Flagsmith. So we're going to bring them on here in a second. But I just wanted to give a quick shout out that if you head to our site, telerik.com/React-Wednesdays, you can always look at upcoming shows. So we're talking about whether React will get you fired for enterprise apps next week. We'll be talking with Paige Niedringhaus about working in large React apps. We've got Tanner Lindsley coming up in a few weeks to talk about React Query. We also have a handy link here too. You can add React Wednesdays to your calendar as well if you want to get reminders of these episodes as well. So check that out.
I think one of the things that's really interesting about that lineup is the show coming up on the 10th. That the person coming on wrote a blog post that went totally crazy viral with over 100,000 views. And so I can't wait to hear the experiences and see what kind of questions we get from the audience, because, there are no silver bullets in this industry. And it's important to talk about what doesn't work as well as what actually works.
Indeed. So without further ado, I want to bring on the guys from Flagsmith. So let's bring in Ben. And Kyle, hey. I see Kyle, you're joining. I'll go ahead and toss you in here as well. Hey guys, why don't you start by introducing yourselves? Ben, maybe you can go first. Tell us what you do, that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Ben Romich. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Flagsmith. Kyle and I are both here in London, where it's been raining for like 6 weeks. We're a commercial open source feature flagging platform. Kyle and I have worked together for many, many years in a software agency in London that I started 18 years ago. And Flagsmith was actually a side project from that business that we open sourced and has kind of, picked up. And that's the focus of my sort of day-to-day work at the moment is trying to get people into the idea of feature flagging and promoting the commercial side as well as the open source business as well.
And Kyle, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yep. So I've been a software developer, worked with Ben for, as he says, many, many years now. And I first came up with the sort of the task at looking at feature flag platforms. Long time before we started Flagsmith, and was looking around, and I needed the tooling personally to complete a lot of projects that we're dealing with that needed to move fast, release fast. And that's what got us to where we are now.
There are so many products that started off as let me scratch my own itch, and it turns out other people have similar itches. I'm curious, before we dig into the product too much, was it much of a shift moving from a services-based business to a product-based business?
Oh, well, we haven't quite achieved that nirvana yet. So so the agency Solid State still exists. Hang on a sec. I'm going to turn this off because it's playing with my. Hopefully that's better. So Solid State Group as an agency still exists. And my business partner still runs that business, but I decided that I wanted to kind of put the full weight behind Flagsmith and just give it a good shot and see what happens with it. But we haven't managed to do achieve the holy grail of leaving clients behind and moving to recurring revenue just yet.
we won't tell them that's the holy grail. Perhaps you could give us a quick intro into Flagsmith and discuss like what kind of open source is it?
Yeah. Okay. So if I can give you like a quick rundown of the platform super quick. So I mean, we are a primarily we're an open source project. The kind of the history of the product was really we were actually running a project for a very large airline, and they were going through the process of agile development. They were doing stand-ups, they had sprints, they had all the language in there. We were building an operational dashboard for them, and it got to the point where we were getting close to wanting to release the code that we'd built, and we discovered, they told us that they had a 1 week deployment window once every 3 months. And so we were like, okay, so that all that agile stuff is kind of, for nothing really, because, that you can't really operate in an agile manner like that. So Flagsmith that was kind of one of the genesis points of the project was, we needed a way when we were working mainly with larger, more enterprise clients. We really wanted a way to be able to manage these features. And the thing that feature flags really give you the single most valuable benefit is they allow you to decouple deploying code with releasing features, and you can achieve that really simply. And a lot of customers of ours and a lot of people who are using the open source project come from a background of having built a database table in their application to do just that. But we wanted as an agency, we wanted a repeatable tool to allow us to do that for our clients. And so that was the kind of birth of the idea really. And it started as a side project within the business. So, we were just hacking away at it in our spare time when we didn't have any client work, and it kind of grew from there. And we open sourced it fairly soon after the first line of code was committed. Just there wasn't really any sort of grand sort of plan behind that. It just felt like the right thing to do. And we saw that there wasn't really a similar project out there that had the same design and architecture that we wanted. So, we thought, well, why not? So yeah, we put it up on GitHub a couple of years ago, and we're slowly growing that project. But I'll just give you, for those people who don't know what a feature flagging platform can provide. Like I say, they basically allow you to decouple deploying code from releasing code. And what that means is, the really typical use case pattern is when you start working on a new feature, create a branch in Git, create a feature flag within your feature flagging platform, and put your feature behind that flag. And in its simplest terms, you just put a conditional based on the flag state, and essentially just hide all your code behind that flag. And if that's a user interface element, that's obviously like a fairly simple thing to do. It could be more complex. It could be like a more complex code path as part of a server-side API, but the kind of concept remains the same regardless. And so what Flagsmith allows you to do is it allows you to kind of sort of structure those flags and manage them both at an environment level, and also being able to manage those flags by targeting individual users or groups of users. So at its simplest, we have a way of, we can create a new flag, we can give it a name and a description, say whether we want it to be enabled or disabled by default. And then as part of the open source project, we have, I think we're up to 11 SDK clients now in different languages. So, if you were coming to it for the first time, you grab the SDK for the language that you're writing your project in, and they're fairly lightweight clients. They allow you to integrate the code into your project, and given a project environment key, we can just go and grab the flag values that we've defined within this project. And so it removes the need for having to manage this stuff manually through a database table or something like that. And it means that you can get started with a concept pretty quickly.
So let me just see if I have all this right. So Flagsmith provides a way to sort of create and manage and deliver flags through this user interface and a variety of SDKs. And the software developer would create a feature behind one of these flags. And then when it's time to turn the feature on, let's say, you'd use the Flagsmith user interface to enable or disable or selectively enable the feature.
It's a basic
that's right.
level.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about decoupling features from production, I think a lot of stuff gets lost there because, every developer has had this fear of what happens when I finally push the button. Sometimes it goes well and sometimes it goes bad. I think there's a piece that you can get in sort of dark deploying features and know that you haven't broken anything, and you can enable and disable them if they cause problems. Can you kind of talk through how that changes development and sort of what benefits teams can have by adopting this kind of methodology?
I can come at it from a developer's point of view, because there is a big point here, and that's around sort of like that anxiety of sort of pushing the button. I always look back on those big projects with those long release cycles, and you got those long release cycles with code building up over months. And the amount of stress that adds versus pushing something you developed yesterday is monumental. Like, so many complexities added on over this bucket of stale code over a large period of time. So it's, a lot of it is about that anxiety and how quickly that you can move. And at the basic level, you can enable and disable features for your entire audience. But what we do in production is actually enable and disable for just people in our organization. So it's not just about enabling a feature globally and then, finding out that it's broken and then turning it off. It's actually turning it on for a subset of users. So that reduces the stress even more.
So you're saying that you dark deploy the features and then you selectively enable for a set of trusted users that you can get feedback from. And then if everything's happy, then you can selectively or fully roll the feature out.
Yeah, and just as an idea, so we use it in production, like for our own website. And there isn't a time where I sit down and work on a feature without pushing live, because it's always behind a flag. Yeah, so it just enables me to do that. Yeah.
Going back to the slow development times, I kind of harken back to the year 2001 when I took a job with a health insurance company, and they gave me my very first task, which was to change a link on a website. I said, great, like, when do you want me to put it in production? An hour from now, tomorrow. They told me I had 3 months. And that what they didn't tell me was two things. A, there would be endless change management meetings to educate people and what are the risks and mitigation strategies of changing this link, as well as the testing paths and the stakeholder chain. And secondly, they're mainframe people, so change is bad. And we went through this process to educate them that, this is a newspaper, change is good. And we sort of won. But it sounds like there are still 2 decades later organizations that take a dim view of quick releases or often releases. Do you find that to be common in your customer base, or is there like a blend of folks that are doing agile as well as folks that are on more, shall we call it, archaic deployment methodologies?
Yeah, I mean, the really, really common thing that you see in large enterprise organizations is, they want to behave, they want their software teams to behave like, like Netflix or Stripe, and they've read an article in a publication about how Netflix are deploying 50 times a day, and they're like, okay, let's do that. But the sort of the engineering that you need to build on to achieve that is really hard, and you need to have a completely fundamental change in perspective in terms of your entire end-to-end development life cycle, basically. And that was one of the when we were thinking up, subjects for side projects before Flagsmith existed, that, the idea of feature flags just sat absolutely perfectly in that sweet spot of like, what's the one thing that you can do? I mean, I guess arguably build a really good, fast, dependable CI/CD platform and pipeline. But other than that, we felt like feature flags is probably the single biggest win you can have in terms of, taking a stride towards being able to do that, because you are just removing such a large risk and uncertainty around, if I'm pushing to deploy into production, there's a huge amount of work that I need to do around de-risking that, and feature flags there's a bunch of other stuff, right? Like that we're not saying don't do that. Like code review is almost more important, and automated testing, unit testing, end-to-end testing, that's super important as well. But feature flags, just from a kind of a sort of peace of mind point of view, we've just found that they're so beneficial in that regard.
Yeah, you can gain some sort of control over what's happening in production, whereas if you are under one of these long deployment kind of calendars, you're sort of have to do like an emergency change, and that creates all kind of problems. I think the executive that read the "let's deploy 10 times a day" thought it would always be the happy path, where it'd be Bambi and rainbows and leprechauns sprinkling gold coins everywhere, and they never thought that, ouch, this thing could actually hurt me. And that's where they kind of over rotate, is that I want all the upside, I want none of the risk. And it sounds like with feature flags, at least you can have the upside of deploying and then take out a lot of the risk by exerting some control over what branches of code or what sort of blocks of code are actually allowed to run or not. Is that a fair restatement?
Yeah, but also the other thing is, some CI/CD pipelines can take 45 minutes, right? So, if you've got a one line of code fix to, if you've pushed something that's broken, and you want to change one byte, you push that one byte, and then you're waiting 44 minutes and 55 seconds for it to hit live, and there's nothing inherently wrong with having maybe 45 minutes is a bit much, but it's just the flexibility it provides to you, and the sort of greasing of the wheels of, the worst thing that we've seen is 15, 16, 20 merge requests that are just sat there piling up. They're getting more and more divergent with the master branch as time goes on, and deploying those things becomes more and more risky and more problematic. And that's real technical debt, right? Like in real time. So just being able to get that stuff out of those branches through a code review process and into production, without being lit up is a huge thing. And the other thing that flags allow you to do, with platforms like Flagsmith or some of the more elaborate solutions, is things like staged rollouts. So we can send out, we can deploy a flag to 1% of a user population, and if we're worried that it's going to cause a load of increased compute on our API, we can just roll that out to 1% of our customers, see how the log rates are like, the CPU performance on the server infrastructure, and if we're happy with that, we can roll that out over a period of a day, or a week if we want to. So that increased flexibility gives you a ton of benefits. And then even at a sort of advanced level, being able to run A/B end tests against your user base. So putting 3 different user routes through say a checkout process, you can put those behind a flag and send those out to a third of your user base, and test the effectiveness of those routes. So just you kind of get all that stuff for free, right? Just by what is really a Boolean and a conditional. And that I remember I mentioned that I was gonna stop working at the agency and start working on Flagsmith to my mate who's an engineer at a big bank, and he's like, wait, hang on, isn't that just a Boolean and a conditional? And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
but that gets you a ton of value.
Is it possible to take a different look at that interface? There's some things you mentioned that I didn't know if we saw.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, sure.
But there was staged rollouts. You mentioned that capability. There was also sort of the selective enablement feature.
Yeah, so one of the things, so either you can, when your application launches, you can grab the flags for that particular environment, and then modify your user interface based on the flag values you've received. But you can also identify yourself to the platform. So typically, if you log into a web application or you open a mobile app which is authenticated, you can identify yourself to the platform. And what that will do is kind of lazily generate a user within our database. And then we can just simply go in and override the flag values for that individual user. So this is, if you're wanting to test yourself in production, you can put the entire feature behind a flag. No one else in the world is seeing that flag, but you can turn it on for yourself, and just see how that works in production. Turn it on.
Let's make sure we capture this all the way. So somewhere in my code, I'll tell Flagsmith what user ID I am, and somewhere in Flagsmith, it knows that this user ID is me, and so I can sort of say, enable this user ID so I can go dark test the feature without affecting anyone else. And Flagsmith will use that information as part of the should I allow this to run check. If I can just keep making up phrases, you probably have better ones for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So yeah, and you can go and override a flag for your colleague or the product manager or one of your clients or whoever you want. But the other thing about identifying users is you can also store trait values against those users. So if I actually show you something, this is like a system in production. So
would like brown hair or gray hair be a trait? Or do you have something else in mind?
Yeah, so we're identifying users and then we're storing their email as a trait within the platform. And what that allows us to do is create what we call segments of users. And segments are just dynamic groups of users that are defined based on a set of rules against user traits. So in our example here, we have an internal users segment which will match if the email address trait of the user matches one of these two regular expressions, flagsmith.com or our old domain name, bullettrain.io, then that user is automatically grouped into that segment. And any user with a trait that matches on one of these two rules will become a member of that segment. And so once you've defined a segment, you can then go in and override a feature based on a segment. So I can simply go in here and say, okay, I want anyone identifying themselves with a flagsmith.com email to have this feature enabled. And we use this, multiple times, a week to test and deploy features ourselves. Anyone who's logging in with a Flagsmith domain account will have that feature enabled and see how it performs. It's kind of zero effort on our part to do that. And you can define traits. They're completely free form. You can define segment rules in any way you want. So, we have customers doing really elaborate stuff, based on geo region, what type of plan they're on, how many times they've purchased something from the store that the site's running. It's completely up to you how to do that. So, if you just want
1 second. So you just touched on something that kind of sparked an idea. So when I think of feature flags, I think of kind of selectively rolling out a feature, but this almost sounds like it's drifting into product testing where, let's say, frequent purchasers from me, I may want to show this feature and see if they'll become even more frequent purchasers. Or maybe like if someone hasn't logged in 90 days, maybe I want to show this feature that, would you get so far as to providing discounts by using Flagsmith?
We have customers doing price testing in a supermarket application using the platform, and like identifying power users via a segment, or high value customers via a segment is like a really common use case. And so they'll use the platform to drive those tests for sure.
Okay, so I can basically push arbitrary traits into Flagsmith and then use segments to kind of grab groups of these traded users and then do stuff about that. Show, hide, do it in percentages. That's a lot more powerful than the simple feature flag tool that we built, I must say. So hats off. If I had a hat, I'd take it off. Good job. Would it be possible to go look at how you define the segment? I did see the regex was in there, but I just wondered what other kind of built-in math you can do.
Yeah, so we have like standard logical Boolean operators against strings and numerical values. The other thing that's super powerful is this percentage split, which allows us to group users based on rough buckets, basically. So if I close that one, we have a 50-50 split segment here. So roughly half of our user population will be a member of this segment and roughly half won't. And that allows us to do, drive things like A/B tests, or if, as I said earlier, if you wanted to do a staged rollout of a feature, and you weren't sure that it might cause some like increased error rates against your API, for example, you can just set this to like 2, and then enable that feature for 2% of your population. So like the sort of roadmap of the project is to try and work on more elaborate kind of versions of this. So being able to more powerfully segment users and use those segments to drive different experiences.
The staged rollout is super neat. Dan told a horror story earlier, so I could tell one real quick. Back in my insurance days, working at big insurance, we had a new feature that we were rolling out, and it was fairly processor intensive, right? So there was some concern of like, well, if we open this up, what do we, how are we going to control access to this? And management was super concerned about this. So we ended up purchasing some super expensive load testing software from IBM so that we could simulate it. This was like the mid 2000s, right? So like, this is the sort of thing you did in the mid 2000s. You paid IBM a crap ton of money, and they would throw like these simulated users at this process. And like, lo and behold, we sent thousands of users in and found like it wasn't going to be a problem. And then we pushed it out, and turns out like no one was interested in this feature. So like it got like almost no traffic. So like all of that ceremony was a complete waste of time and effort, right? We're talking like weeks and months to prep for this.
Oh, yeah.
And all the things you said too, like, because it holds up the code base, because then, well, you can't actually push that code to production because you don't want to turn it live. So now it's hanging out in some staging branch for months, and you have to like do all sorts of shenanigans and source control to work around that. And it's just a nightmare. So I can totally see the advantage of just being able to quickly say like, let's send it to internal people, or let's just send it in 2% of people, just to make sense. Because lots of times, like, especially with these performance things, you just don't know as a developer. You don't know if people are going to care.
You don't know.
And you don't know like the actual load when this thing ramps up. Like, so it helps just de-risk all of this.
Because, I did quite a bit of load testing back in the day, and a lot of it depends on what is the actual path of the user. Like, just because you load test a feature doesn't mean there's not some weird memory leak if you do A, B, and C.
It's so much guessing.
Now, there was one time when we were first learning how to load test, we downloaded JMeter, which is the Java-based load tester, and this will be quick. I know it's far afield, but it's pretty funny. So we were trying to performance test this application before we ran it live, and we were so impressed because on one server in one database, we could have like 5,000 concurrent users. And so we went and told management, this thing is like super powerful and all this. After we dug into the load test, it turns out the server was quickly overwhelmed. And what we were load testing is how quick it could return 500 errors. And then good capacity for that. So having the ability to say 2%, then go to 10%, like that's a bit more sure, I think, than just winding up JMeter and turning it loose.
I think one thing to add to this as well is it's not always your code. Like many people have like third-party services that they're like depending on, right?
Yeah.
So what if those go down? Like, what if you're like a lot of people have flags behind those because it's out of their control, so they could turn it off because their service is down. So
that's actually so you could even have like say like actually one of the services I was telling a story for was it ordered insurance reports. So like you might not know this, but when you sign up for insurance, basically the insurance company is going to try to look up every last detail about your life because they price that into the rates that they're giving you. So we partnered with some service to do it. Well, this service was running on God knows what infrastructure, right? So we were concerned with what happens if we throw a bunch of activity on it. But I think what you're saying is you could have a flag around it, like if service is unstable, something like that. And basically, if you know like that the thing's down, instead of throwing people into an error that's going to keep overwhelming it, you could basically just hit your nice friendly if check that puts up a happy message to like mitigate that the best you can, sort of thing. Is that more or less?
Pretty much, yes. Whilst the problem is like that's out of your hands is being dealt with. One of the best examples I've got at this is one of our clients is a big betting platform, and they have many different sort of companies that they use to place the bets. Now, if out of those 4 goes down, they still want to just have the service work, but they can just turn off that one provider, and the rest are up.
Interesting.
Yeah, that was a really interesting use case. Like, and we didn't realize that some of the platforms were kind of like pretty creaky, and this was like a really, really bad problem for them, right? Because it was blocking. You know, there'd be like maybe one service had the best odd, but their their API had gone down, and they just wanted to be able to dynamically like just not show that that bookmaker to their customers, and they'd kind of not, they couldn't really solve that problem. And it was like, well, it's like really simple, right? Like it got to the point where they were considering automating the flag just based on an uptime checker, against the API. So one of the things that we've been really surprised at is just the sort of creative uses of the concepts. Like I never would have imagined, we've been working on it pretty hard now for like over 3 years, and we still have like, calls with potential customers, and they're kind of coming up with ideas for things that we had never considered, just because, they've been living with a problem or, some sort of thing that they just don't really, it's kind of a new tool really. And it's really been interesting to me that, we just keep on coming up with new ways of using the platform.
You touched on an operative word there. It was potential customers. Can you walk us through like how this is organized? There's like an open source piece and there's like a proprietary piece or like a paid piece. Can you walk us through it?
Yeah. So when we started the business, the kind of we didn't really put much sort of strategic thought behind the commercialization, because we were more, it was kind of a side project, and we were more interested in just making it open, getting a community, having people contribute to it. And, we built the company on so many different open source projects. We're really, really heavy React users, for example, React Native. And, we just thought, it's just the right thing to do. But it's felt like, well, everyone else is doing a paid SaaS API, let's do that. Right. Like, and that's been successful, and we've been really happy with that. But what we didn't realize was turns out there's a really big market for on-premise solutions. So large enterprises, we're talking about large enterprises as being one of the the most sort of perfect customers for or users of the platform, but a large proportion of those companies just can't go near. Hang on a sec, you want me to send my customer data to a third-party API somewhere?
Yeah. Nothing could go wrong.
Right. So, and that's something that we, being completely honest, we were a little naive about. We just hadn't sort of thought that situation through. And yeah, a lot of sort of our industry kind of lives by, what's going on in the valley, and companies that would just happily send their they just happily use a third-party API, right? And we never really considered that there's this huge kind of underneath the surface part of the iceberg, which is like, it's on premise or it's not happening. And so we're now seeing a lot of interest around deployments on top of like OpenShift. Red Hat OpenShift is really, really, really popular, and Kubernetes, and using OpenShift operators to deploy the product to to an on-premise infrastructure that is managed by someone within that organization. And so we're sort of building a go-to-market movement around providing support for that, helping customers get installed, get their uptime nice and high, and helping them with consulting in terms of like what the best way to use the platform is within their teams. And so we're starting to get to the point now where we are building closed source features to make sure that the business is sustainable. We're trying really hard we actually came up with a kind of philosophy of it. I've sort of made a very short sort of philosophy document about how we try and figure out whether to make something open or closed. And it's like one of the closed features, for example, is running on top of Oracle, and it's like that was just easy, right? Because like
10 companies worldwide.
Oracle, but if Oracle is in the name of your feature, you are allowed to charge for it. I think that's like on the 101 level of like designing a software service.
Yeah.
Uncle Larry would agree.
Yeah. So I haven't bought my Russian fighter jet yet. So like he did. So
there's time. They're still selling them.
Maybe. So yeah. So we're and so some of those features or some of that code that we're writing is like, well, that's obviously it's no one's going to complain that there's a closed source Oracle feature that we have to support that, right? Like, and we have to build test pipelines to test against Oracle, and there's kind of actually found one like a couple of weeks ago, like really interesting edge case about how Oracle deals with multiple column indexes differently to Postgres, and so that's something that we've had to take on, and we're sort of we haven't really come up against one of those features that's caused a massive argument within the company of like, no, it needs to be open. No, well, we need to make, so hopefully I think the majority of those decisions it's going to be fairly easy to figure out where they're going to fall. But
so there's some commercial features based on usage or what it costs you guys. But like if I'm an open source user, and I assume there are many of them, what can I do with the product and platform? Yeah,
basically the only thing you can't do is we've got a role-based access control feature where you can say, right, this group of users, so this group of like developers have access to the production infrastructure, but no one else can toggle a flag in the production infrastructure, for example. So there's role-based access control. There's SAML authentication, whitelisted OAuth authentication, and we also support MySQL and Oracle as the on the closed source product. But everything else that I've showed you, you can run completely by yourself. But one of the things we haven't done, which we do want to do, is put in some telemetry on some opt-in telemetry on the API, because at the moment other than like Docker pulls and Git clones, we've honestly got no idea how many people are using the platform. So that's another thing we're going to do that is kind of it's going to be slightly interesting.
So what's the install like if I'm going to just grab it from the site and go?
So you can Docker compose up, and you'll have everything. We run on top of AWS, and we have some Pulumi and Terraform scripts to do things like that. it's a very, very simple architecture. It's a Postgres database, Django REST framework API, and a React front end. And actually, that's also been a really interesting thing, because we've had to, we're actually got an issue at the moment where we'd kind of really like to do a build sort of a queuing system into the platform, but introducing a queuing system adds quite a lot of infrastructure complexity. And the last thing we want is the open source install instructions to be like 58 pages of like, now go to your Kafka queue and do something in Kafka. So it's actually been a really interesting sort of constraint that we've kind of naturally had put on ourselves, where we want the open source install experience to be really good, because I've been there. Then the last thing you want is to start reading, you scroll down one page and they start talking about Kafka, and you're like, oh, I'm not in that. I'm not in this for that. Not that there's anything wrong with Kafka. It's a great tool, but I don't need that in my life when I'm just trying to get something simple up and running. So it's actually been a really interesting kind of this infrastructure constraint around, like, you've got a database and you've got a REST API, and that's all you got to play with, has actually been kind of fun.
Yeah, it's nice seams. I'm curious, when I think about TDD, when I first learned unit testing, I had to almost think differently about how to write code, because the code I was writing wasn't very testable. I got better at it. What would you say that the keys are for feature flag driven development? Like, if you're going to adopt that mindset, what are the patterns or mental models or sort of things you'd recommend someone to do?
I think on my side, I'd really recommend like a good end-to-end test. I think they're less common than just sort of like fully unit testing your platform and that sort of thing. But a proper end-to-end test just catches some things that unit tests just don't. And because you can visualize it going throughout the app, like, that's something that gives me a lot of, a lot of confidence, and a lot of, like, I can just run it. I can see it going through all of the app. That really lets me just sort of release quickly and confidently, I think. And the cost benefit of it is great, I think.
Yeah, I mean, testing, it does, it's not a silver bullet, and it can be, it can throw up some interesting issues where, not everyone's seeing the same application, right? Like, the application is behaving differently for different people, which is normal in an application, but it's a kind of an extra dimension of, it turns out they were, I mean, I don't know, you imagine, like, you got a support team and suddenly 1% of your users are seeing this new feature and they're like, I don't have any idea what the hell you're talking about. So, it's you do have to put some thought behind it, and the entire organization needs to be sort of understanding of the concepts, I guess.
I think as well, on that note, culture is probably one of the biggest things. It's sort of, you've really got to embellish this idea, and you've really got to sort of commit to it and not half use it. So, for example, that would mean pushing live with the feature flag before you even start doing development with an empty skeleton, and making that okay as part of your development process, versus like whatever processes you've got in place, pull requests and that sort of thing, and code review. There is no code. You're just pushing an empty feature flag to get started. That's okay. It's okay to push that live. Nothing's going to fall apart. Yeah.
Interesting. TJ?
So we have a couple questions that have been coming in through chat, and I'll just remind everybody, if you have any questions as well, now is a great time to drop those in. So Johnny Z wants to know, have there been any customers that use this for containing security breaches, like turning off services or like air gapping machines at runtime to manage an attack?
Not that I've heard of. I mean, we have some really great relationships with our customers. I don't know if they're good enough to start talking to us about that. No, I mean, yeah, we have customers that have turned, they disable features when they're broken, for whatever reason. Yeah, quite often due to like third-party dependencies that have failed. But I'm not aware of that, but it's not to say that. I mean, we do have we have a large number of our customers that just have like the red button kill switch of like turn the put the maintenance page. I mean, maintenance page is a great use case, right?
Yeah.
Like how much harder is life now, with multiple applications, web services, web applications, like just turn the site off. Well, that's a non-trivial task sometimes.
Where is the cord to that server?
Yeah.
Yeah, Johnny, I can see this right now. You got this big knock. It's all dark. There's screens all over the place. And there's like this red sort of blinking thing. And a guy comes in wearing a feature flag cape and just starts pushing the Flagsmith button. And all of a sudden, everything's back to normal.
I could see it like it couldn't just be like you could use it around a service. Like even if the service is being like temperamental or there's all sorts of times where you see everybody has these issues, right? Like Slack randomly goes down. Well, maybe you have a Slack API on your page and you don't want to keep sending people into that funnel. And I mean, potentially, I guess for security breaches as well. Like if there's some I don't know, some service you're using is having any sort of issues whatsoever. It's just a nice little thing to have, and to have a backend where you can just go in and click a button to turn it off is kind of nice.
Exactly. One of the things that's neat is if you had, let's say, a service that ran real-time data calls and that was a third-party thing and it was misbehaving, you could easily hit a flag and have it served from cache. That way you're not pounding this other third-party API. Your service is still healthy. And I think that's different than the model I kind of walked into this meeting with. When I thought of feature flagging, I thought, well, this is obviously to roll out or not roll out user-facing features. But it's actually almost a real-time way to adjust your application however it makes sense.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. That's the kind of main thing that we've kind of realized is like it can turn your application into a kind of a dynamic thing. And it goes back to what I was saying about decoupling from deploying features to releasing them. And yeah, like we're still, as I said, like we're still finding things and use cases that we just hadn't considered before.
Our Stroopwafel buddy's back. Quantum
wants to know, and
this is a great question. Can you build a queuing system on top of Postgres? There was a really interesting. I was thinking about this the other day actually, because I remember there was a really interesting Hacker News post about this. That there is a SQL command in Postgres that allows you to do that. Where you can like pop you can atomically pop something off of a queue, and yeah, so that's actually I should write more about this, like the constraint of not being able to use some flashy AWS service or third party, because like one of the things, so we introduced InfluxDB as a time series database to drive a couple of our features that really, they just really needed a time series database. So there's a soft dependency on InfluxDB. The application platform will work completely fine without it, but you'll lose a couple of features. And that was kind of like a big decision, because it's like, and especially like for enterprise customers, it's like, well, I have to, if it's a data store, it has to be redundant, right? And if you want redundant influx, then you have to pay them. So there's kind of interesting trade-offs around that, but having to be self-disciplined such that you can't use these, because I can't say to my enterprise customers, oh, you need to buy that from that guy and that from that guy, and then you can buy this from me. Like, they just be like,
that's not a whole product. That's a bad game.
So, that's a great point. Like, you can run a reliable performant queuing system on top of Postgres, which most people would just go, oh, I'll run, whatever queuing system is available to me in my cloud or whatever. But we don't have that luxury, really.
Well, I think that's also great, because imagine I'm doing an on-prem deployment. I don't necessarily want an external dependency.
Yeah, no, they definitely don't, right?
Self-contained. Yeah, it's not like I'm putting 100,000 people into the Flagsmith container. 100,000 people are going to my app where I've got the config file. maybe you should kind of walk through what does my app have and what does Flagsmith have? Because I think that also might make some sense for folks. Isn't Flagsmith more like an administration console, the Flagsmith kind of web interface? And so there'd be no scenarios where application end users would go to there or create any load, right?
Yeah. I mean, so it depends on obviously like what your policy is around grabbing the flags, but yeah, like the end user would have no knowledge of it whatsoever.
Well, I think the naive way to grab the flag is on application startup, I grab the flags, but obviously, 1 millisecond after that, I'm stale. So what options are there and what do you recommend and what are the trade-offs?
Shall I take that, Ben?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah. So it depends.
That's such a hard question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it totally depends on your use case. So we do have rare instances, and a lot of people say that they need real-time flags when they literally just don't. Like they don't have the use case where they need real-time flags, and there are like elegant sort of solutions where you fetch when you need to fetch. For example, when the user logs in, when you minimize the app, when you maximize the app, that sort of thing. I mean, we on our Flagsmith app, we just fetch it when you log in, pretty much, and that's it. But then we do have people where that they need to know very quickly that the flag has changed, and that's totally fine because we've got like webhook integration that can push into whatever like real-time system that they have. Because if they've got that use case, they've almost certainly got a real-time system in place with WebSockets or whatever. So you can just push it into that if a flag's changed with our like WebSocket integration. So it really depends. Like from mobile applications as well, like we've got a couple of groceries where they have bad signal in their stores, so they refetch the flags whenever they can detect network connection come back on.
Makes sense.
For example, just things like that. And you can do polling as well if you want to do polling. That's totally fine. But it really does depend on the use case, to be honest.
So you could load the flags every request. You could load the flags when the app starts up. You could find some sensible events that might mean you need to refresh, like you said, minimizing the app and then maximizing again. Those all make perfect sense to me.
Yeah, and like whenever you fetch the flags, we sort of you can opt out of it, but we sort of cache them like in local storage and that sort of thing for the native mobile apps for the web applications. So if you're dealing with sort of complexities where you're detecting whether they're online, offline, you can still do stuff as a fallback.
And presumably you're getting the flags as like a batch thing too, right? Like if you get a flag, or is that configurable too? Or there's the typical use case, like I log in a user, I get all the flags, and like maybe I have some situation where I need to, like you said, where I need to refresh them for whatever reason. But I imagine the common case is user logs in, you get all the flags, and then they're just stored available, so you don't have to keep making that like round trip to the network.
Yes, but that does depend on whether your integration is a client-side integration versus a server-side integration, right? With the client-side integrations, yes, we get all of the flags, and that's like stateful and that sort of thing. Then it gets a bit more complicated with the isomorphic applications where you've got server-side rendering and React, but we've got solutions for that with like Next.js and that sort of thing.
It's a good point, because I was actually being the front end person, I was totally thinking about it in this in front end terms. But yeah, you absolutely might need to be checking on your server side stuff, perhaps even more so.
Yeah, I love developing in Next.js, so we thought of that very early on, where you can state manage and sort of server side render flags, as well as pass them over to the front end and share that state. So that's absolutely it's a bit different, but yeah. But then with the server side instances, it's not going to be stateful most of the time, is it? So you're going to be, if you're identifying a particular user, you get like a single flag or like a batch of flags and do it on that basis versus sort of getting all of the flags state managed. Yeah.
That's actually been another benefit of the on-premise is it's mainly data sensitivity and data security that people want that, but if you're running it or self-hosting it on top of your own stack and in your own infrastructure, then it's just like making a database call. So you know, you don't have to worry about latency at that point as well, really.
All right. Well, we've got a few minutes left here. I want to put a last call in for Chad. If you have any other questions you want to ask these guys about feature flags, Flagsmith, if you want Ben to talk about his cat a little bit, I'm very amused.
I think, if there's a cautionary tale here in my mind, it's when we built our feature flag system for this large educational provider, it was a server-side feature flag system. And then, some more folks who were building apps on top of what we did, they wanted feature flags too. So then it became creating some packet and shoving it in Akamai and then having like some process to kill that and bring it back up. And we almost turned into, I wouldn't call us a feature flag company, but it was certainly part of our initiatives. And it really wasn't our mission. Our mission was to build something else. And, what seemed like an easy idea, throw a table out there in the database, add some columns, check it periodically when it made sense. It kind of spiraled into dealing with Akamai and like front end code and helping other people troubleshoot their problems. And, it was an insidious thing. I think, it's beautiful to know I can go to Flagsmith and download an open source package, install it on-prem with minimal dependencies and not have to do any of that kind of servicey work. I'm
Dan,
curious.
No, it's like a rite of passage for a developer. Like if you haven't built it like a crappy database table full of Booleans, what are you even doing? Like you have to do it for yourself to see how it can fall apart very quickly.
Dynamic forms and apparently these together feature flag systems are the rite of passage. Who knew?
Yeah.
No, that's so common. Like I've done a lot of consulting over the years for different development teams, and it's so common that like definitely a proud developer would say, "No, I can make a feature management system. That's absolutely fine." But it's just you got to think of the bigger picture. If you're going to be maintaining a product over the next few years, you want to be concentrating on the product, like your core competency, the core thing that you're developing. You don't want to have to troubleshoot your feature flag platform in order to be able to get to the feature that you're working on. Like, why would you put yourself under that pressure? Really, you want to offload as many complexities as you can and concentrate on your core thing.
And just to add, like, we're not the only open source product out there. There's a whole bunch that come at it from slightly different angles. So you've got loads of different options. Or commercial options as well. So, but yeah, the main thing is like, especially now, like as people are building out more stuff around microservices and things like that, like, having one table in one database serving one app is just kind of nonsensical in my mind, really, at this point.
Well, guys, this has been awesome. One thing we'd like to end with is just sort of plugs, or you could think of this just as a link dump. Like I'd be curious if people want to follow you or have any additional questions, what's the best place to do that? If you have any links for like the best place to get started with Flagsmith or any like recommended like resources and stuff, if you want to just drop any of those things, and I can make sure to pass those along. And we'll also make sure these end up in places like the YouTube video and such as well. So do you want to drop like Twitter or where should we go to follow you guys?
So that, I mean, our GitHub homepage is probably the most important, and sort of pretty much everything follows off from that. We're not asking for or expecting huge feature pull requests or anything like that. Like people who contribute to the README or the documentation or raise issues or ask questions, those things are just as important to us, really. Just star in the repositories and asking questions. We did actually get we have the where is it? So on the API project, we're using like the discussions, which is kind of unusual. I didn't really know about them actually. So they're kind of like they're kind of like more of a forum and not pure GitHub issues. So we're starting to get people. There's only a couple of posts on there at the moment, but they're really good for talking about like integration approaches and sort of design patterns around how best to use them, because they're not like issues, but they're just kind of like more subjective, like how would you do this, or So if anyone has any questions or ideas or thoughts about approaches, then they can definitely push them in there. That's something that we're trying to get sort of up and running.
Actually, I had no idea discussions on GitHub were a thing. Like,
I know.
Is this like,
No.
do you
They're
enable
like
it in settings or?
No. There's an issue list somewhere in GitHub that if you ask to be put on as a beta tester, I can't remember. I think I can't remember which open source project I was talking about, and they had them and said they were brilliant, and so I went and tracked them down. But I had no idea. They've kind of not done a great job in communicating them, because you see so many GitHub projects where the issue list is just a bunch of people asking.
Same thing.
We know how that works. The GitHub, I want to say that was released like 4 or 5 months ago, because I remember sticking it in the newsletter.
Right.
And I haven't heard anything about it since. In fact, even when I go to the Flagsmith GitHub page, I don't see the discussion.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to find. And
maybe they're using Flagsmith to hide it from me. It could happen.
Good one. Yeah. No, it's good. You can like bump issues into that discussion list. So if someone asks you something that's not an issue, then
that's kind of slick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Anything else you guys want to plug? Anything else to wrap up with?
Well, I guess if you don't want to go through the effort of like going through the whole doc system, cloning and that sort of thing, and you want to just look at the platform, just simply going to the website, and like you can try it out for free. You can build features, you can integrate it within your site within like 10 minutes.
Yeah, so we've got a totally free tier. Like you don't need a credit card. You can use it forever. The only limits we have are on the number of developer seats and the number of API calls you're making a month. But if you've got a side project or something that's not receiving a huge amount of traffic, then we have a ton of people using the platform like that, and we're more than happy to provide that.
Yeah, it seems like an easy way to try it versus the whole download, install, try to figure out what's broken with the install. 4 hours later, maybe it works, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like you said, in 10 minutes, you can see if this is a product for you or not.
Yeah, I mean, the SDKs mean that you should be able to be, getting flags back into your application in like less than 10 minutes, I would say.
Yeah.
With a trailing wind.
I think we should put Johnny's comment up.
Yeah, Johnny says nothing ever takes just 10 minutes. That sounds like a challenge.
But at least the marketing pitch is it takes 10 minutes.
It was one of the things that really annoyed me when I was evaluating feature flag platforms like 4 years ago, or maybe that amount of time, where I had to go to documentation in order to sort of get started and scroll through loads of documentation, versus sort of the page I'm on, see a little snippet, like expand that snippet, paste it into my application, and then I'm up and running. So we did focus on trying getting it down to 10 minutes. So hopefully you have good luck getting it in 10 minutes. I wouldn't see why not, though.
Well, that's great. I mean, we certainly appreciate the effort, and your users, I'm sure, are throwing flowers for you. And, we appreciate you coming on the show and explaining all this stuff. It's pretty interesting. I know a lot more about feature flags than when we started.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, guys. It's been loads of fun.
Dan, you want to wrap us up here? Get us started?
Yeah, I'll plug our Enterprise React newsletter. That's how I found out about Flagsmith in the first place. All our developers submit articles, and so it comes out every 2 weeks. We get to meet the coolest people in the React community and beyond. So if you're into newsletters and think Enterprise React could be your thing, then sign up, and don't worry, we never spam.
Yep. And I'll just drop in the link to React Wednesdays here in the chat one more time. So if you're curious about upcoming shows, you want to add this to your calendar. Something we do every week. We just bring on cool people. We chat. It's pretty laid back, and you get the chance to ask guys like this questions and learn a little something. So make sure to tune back in. But thanks, guys, one last time. This was a lot of fun. I definitely learned more about feature flags than I knew existed. So definitely some cool stuff.
Brilliant. Cheers.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
All right. Until next week, guys.
See ya.